Magic button.
You got it.
Here we go.
This is Marlington Local School District Finance Committee meeting on Wednesday, October 27th, isn't it? Is this the right day on here? Yeah. Patty, I'll turn it over to you for the 5-year forecast discussion.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Ryan Gonzoni. He is an analyst for Forecast 5, and he's worked closely with districts for over 20 years, analyzing the district revenues and expenditures and identifying current trends within their districts and looking at possible future needs for their district. Ryan's going to walk us through the November forecast. All right.
All right, I will share my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
We can see it.
Okay. So since the last time we met, there's been some significant changes in the state funding formula. We'll cover those. You've also had some positive news in your tax revenue. And then also the district has received additional ESSER funds that they are using to offset the operating deficit of the district. So right now, in a summary version, we do anticipate the district will have an operating deficit this year of about $480,000. And then that starts to increase in 23 and 24. The reason you start to see more of an increase as you go farther out is, number one, your expenses are increasing, and also because the staff that you were paying with ESSER in 24 come back, I believe it's 24, come back out of the back to the general fund for 25. So that's one of the reasons why you see that start to expand. A couple of things that we'll go over is when we look at your revenue detail, the district did have, because of the current housing market, you had an increase in your residential values of about almost $50 million. And that is not, that's been pretty significant. It was a 20% increase in your values. And that's going to impact the forecast this year and next year. You can see that in 2018, it was an increase of about 13% or 28 million. And in 2015, it was an increase of 22 million. The one thing we don't know is how long the housing boom will continue. We do have an additional increase in 24 of 21 million. And that could change as we move forward, knowing what's happening with the housing market. So how does it impact you? Well, a couple ways. It's going to, your inside millage is going to increase your some revenue for you. And we'll show you that here in a second. And it's also going to get your tax rates closer to the 20 mil floor. So you can see in 21, the district, in 2020, the district was at 23 mils for class 1. And in 22, you're going to be down to 20.61. Why this is important is there's a piece of legislation called House Bill 920 that was voted in the late 70s that says it caps inflation so that as property values increase, millage goes down. And you can see that you're dropping 2.43 mils this tax year. But once you get to 20 mils, you can't drop anymore. And so what happens is if you drop below 20 mils, there's an artificial increase, which means additional tax revenue to the district. If your property values continue the way we think they're going to continue, you're going to hit the 20 mil floor for class 1 revenue in 2024. So it'll be, if the housing market slows down, let's say you don't have the increases that we're estimating, it may take a little bit longer, but you're definitely headed on a trajectory for the 20 mil floor. Your class 2 property, you're not close to it. You're still over 8 mils away. So you're not going to be hitting that 20 mil floor there. But that is a positive thing if you can get there in 24 for the district. One other thing that happened this past year that we weren't anticipating was you had a higher collection rate. So in 2020, your collection rate was 99.94 gross collection rate. That's delinquencies plus current on all your class 1 and class 2. And you actually went to 103.28% in 21. So for those reasons, the additional increase in values, a significant increase in values, and then over collecting basically had people pay their delinquencies and more people pay their taxes on time. For the current year over, we were estimating last year, you're up about $900,000 in tax revenue. A portion that's going to be ongoing because of the increased values, a little bit less than $500,000 a year because your values increased by so much. So that's good news to the district. When we look at your public utility collections, because of the Nexus pipeline, and they're not paying their full tax bill because they've contested their rates, you're collecting right around 51%. So we believe you're going to continue collecting 51% unless that lawsuit is settled in your favor, which could be a number of years before it's settled. So as a result, there's about a little bit less than $2.4 million the district does not collect because of them contesting their values annually. Any questions on your property taxes?
Brian, how much did you say is contested on that we're not collecting annually?
From an actual dollar amount perspective, it's about $2.4 million in actual revenue to the district.
And if you go over 20 mils more again as to how that benefits the district, and is that also a benefit to the residents who are paying the tax, how that impacts their taxes? So
I would not say it's necessarily House Bill 920 in general is a benefit to taxpayers because as property values go up, millage rates go down, except for on your charter millage, which is called inside millage. And so every year you can see on the screen in 2017, your class 1 effective millage rate was 24.94 mils. And then as property values have changed, that rate, and in recent times, that rate has actually gone down because property values have continued to increase. Once every 3 years, you have either a trial update where the county looks at recent home sales, or you have a reappraisal, which they actually go out to every piece of property and reevaluate the value of that property. And in those years is when the district has seen those increase in values we talked about. And most recently is when you had that $49 million increase, 20% increase in values. So as a result, your values drop. And so you're going to drop to 2.43. You're going to drop by 2.43 mils from tax year 20 to tax year 21 because of House Bill 920. So what happens is as you increase millage moving forward, let's say once you get past 2024, you can't go below 20 mils. So if you had the same type of situation in 24, where because of increases in property values, your millage was going to drop by, let's say 2 mils, you would drop to 18 mils, but because it's now in the Ohio Constitution says you can't go below 20 mils, it's going to go back up to 20. So there will be some inflationary growth then on any millage below 20 mils because you can't drop below 20. Some taxpayers might not see that as an advantage of all because that means that their taxes aren't going to continue. Their millage rate won't go below 20 mils. That's the lowest it can go. So as their property values go up, they're still going to pay a minimum of 20 mils. And that includes your inside charter millage as well as your the levies you've passed historically. One way to help illustrate that is if we look at your historic tax rates. So prior to 1976, you had a bunch of levies that were passed. They're combined here, but their full voted rate, they were voted at 26.4 mils. They're only collecting this year at 5.46 mils because over time, as property values have gone up, that millage has continued to go down. Same with the most recent one you passed in 2003, which is a renewal levy originally passed in 3. It was originally passed at 8.5 mils, and it's only collecting at 6.26 mils. So the combination of these 4 levies plus your charter millage can't be below 20 effective mils. On the flip side, House Bill 920 also says you cannot go above your full voted rate. You're not in danger in any of your millage right now of going above the full voted rate. That did happen to districts during the recession. And what happens is if for example, if a 5 mil levy produces $5 million and there's a decrease in property values, and now 5 mils only brings in $4 million, the most that levy could ever collect is $4 million after that point. It can never go back to 5 million. You are not in danger of that happening here. You still have some room even between your last levy you had approved here with still about 1.24 mils before it reached that full vote rate. You'd have to see a pretty significant drop in values for that to happen. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Another thing that I wanted to show you is we've had a fundamental change in the state funding formula. And it's a complicated change, and I'm going to download a report to help explain some of that. But when we look at your revenue, you can see if we are looking just at your state funding, I'm going to bring those in here. So if you look, your state funding is actually going to go up from 21 to 22. And so you have some that in red here is called restricted, and green's unrestricted. So restricted means the state's going to tell you how you have to spend it. Unrestricted, they don't necessarily tell you. It has to go for the general education of the students. One thing you'll notice when I bring in your all other revenue, you've had a significant drop in all other revenue as well. The reason for this is this, when we see the expense side, you're going to see something similar to this. The state is no longer funding students based off where they live, and then the district pays or receives money if you have kids that don't live there that are educated there. They are now educating students based off where they're paying for students based off where they're educated. So you're no longer going to have open enrollment revenue. You're going to get funding for students. Those open enrollment students comes through your state funding now. And there's a calculation that says how much money you're going to get per student. And it's a variable calculation depending on how many students you have, what happens with your property values, what happens with your fairly adjusted gross income in relation to the rest of the state. By that same token, when we get to expenses here in a little bit, you've had a significant decrease in expenses because community schools, scholarships, and open enrollment out are no longer charged to the district. Scholarships and community schools are now funded separately. They don't go against the district's state funding. And open enrollment out, just like the open enrollment in, those kids are funded where they are being educated, so there's no deductions and expenses. We'll go over that here in a second. There are a lot of changes in the new state funding formula. We used to have these funds called wellness funds. They came in 2 years ago under the governor's budget. And since that was in a separate fund, those are now brought back into the general fund. In addition to that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can share this report. Let me share this report now. In addition to that, there is now gifted funds that are restricted. So you have to spend so much on gifted students, or the state can reclaim those funds. So you have more money that they're telling you how to spend. The part that I wanted to review with you is what's happened to revenue, what's happened with expenses in relation to this change in the state funding formula, and how does it affect your cash balance? So if you look in this column here, it's showing you for restricted, you got $9 million last year, 354 in restricted, over $2 million, $2,076,000 in open enrollment. So your total state funding for comparison purposes was $11,433,000. This year, if you look at those same revenue sources, you're actually going to have a drop of $767,000 in revenue. And the reason for that is mainly because of the open enrollment revenue going away and how they're accounting for your tuition expenses. So when we look at your tuition expenses, you had $1.2 million you were spending in open enrollment out, paying to other districts. You also had $236,000 in community schools, $76,000 in STEM, $23,000 in autism, and $114,000 in Peterson scholarships, for a grand total of $1,652,000 in tuition you were paying out that you no longer pay this year. So it's no longer an expense. When we see your purchase services, you're going to see a significant reduction in that because the state no longer charges you. However, the state has shifted $742,000 in wellness funding back into the general fund. So in total, your expenses, if you spend all your wellness fund, which your wellness fund, you actually have a cash balance here, so you're going to bring it in over a couple of years. There is a net impact on your expenditures of a reduction of $910,000. The $1,652,000 being reduced, plus bringing the $742,000 wellness funds back in. So in total, even though your revenue went down $767,000, your expenses are going down $910,000. So the district's impact, because of this new state funding formula, on their cash balance this year is $142,000 positive. You basically got $142,000 more than how you were funded last year. Now, moving forward, there is very little chance the district's going to see any increase in state revenue. The reason is when they're phasing this formula in. So as they phase it in this year, they're phasing it in at 14%, the biggest section, the base cost of it. The economically disadvantaged portion, they don't start phasing in until next year. Then next year, it's 33.33%. That is important because the current state law is only for 2 years. We are assuming that they'll continue to phase in this formula at the same rate moving forward. So in 24, to be a 50% phase in, then 66, 26 would be over 80%, finally being fully phased in by 27. There are 3 different funding formula guarantees in this model. And what that means is you can't get less than what that guarantee says. One says you cannot get less than what you got in 2020. That is the 2020 base cost guarantee. And you are on that guarantee. So the state's saying you can't get less than you got in 2020. Then there's another one because of changes in wellness funds that's called a supplemental guarantee. And that is a look back to 21. And you're on that guarantee as well. And then you're also on a third guarantee for transportation. They've changed the way they fund transportation. And you're on the transportation guarantee right now for what looks like for 3 years. So what does that mean? It means that there's 3 different components in this funding formula that there's no increase in revenue for you. What would it take for you to get off the funding guarantee and realize additional state revenue dollars based off of your projected property values, fairly adjusted gross income in relation to the rest of the state? You would have to increase this year by about 186 students to get off the base cost guarantee and 188 students to get off the supplemental guarantee. As they phase this formula in, that number grows. So by next year, you'd need about 646 more students to enroll in the district to get $1 more from the state. By the time you get out to 2026, you would need about 2,624 more students enrolled in the district to get $1 more from the state. It is safe to say that your district is pretty firmly on the funding guarantee. And there's not a realistic view as of right now, unless you had a monumental change in enrollment, that you're going to see additional state dollars. There's an important piece to mention on this. You also could have a reduction in funding if you reduce your open enrollment in by 10% or 20 students, whichever is greater. If you do go over that number, then they will start reducing your state aid based off of, there's a catch-all here. They didn't want districts that had open enrollment just to eliminate all open enrollment and maintain the same level of funding. By the same token, if you increase your open enrollment levels next year, you're not going to get any additional revenue unless you went over 186 kids next year. I'm sorry, 646 kids next year, because this year's pretty much your open enrollment kids are in. So increasing your open enrollment levels is not going to produce additional revenue like it had in years past. And you can decrease open enrollment levels up to 10% or 20 students, whichever is greater, and not have any effect on your funding. So it is an important note that is a significant change of how the districts were funded previously. You basically could increase your funding levels by bringing more open enrollment students in and getting last year's $6,020 per student. That's not going to be the case moving forward because you're a guaranteed district. Districts that are not guaranteed districts could get dollar for dollar increases when they increase open enrollment. Any questions on that? There's a lot. It's a very complicated new state funding formula. I'd be happy to answer any questions on it. But overall, for your district, you had a positive benefit this year because of the way that they changed how they do not charge for tuition students anymore and how they brought your students in, your open enrollment students in, and count them as part of the funding. But after this year, there's not a real benefit, financial benefit to the district until you get to 25 when you get off the transportation guarantee, and you might have some minimal increases in funding from additional transportation dollars if there's no changes to the formula by that point. One other thing that I wanted to point out is this is a graph showing your tuition expenses. And this is when we look at purchase services, you're going to see a big decrease, especially from what we were projecting for purchase services, because these lines here, which is your open enrollment tuition cost, as well as this gray here, and then some of this green is no longer going to be in the district's budget. And that's why you see a huge drop from 21 to 22 because of the significant way that the state changed how they account for tuition students. Okay, so with that, I will go back to the forecast. And when we look at salaries, I'm going to bring up a salary. So for your certified salaries, you did offset last year, and you can see in this green, this is offsetting salaries by using ESSER funds. You do bring in your certified salaries this year. You're starting to bring some of those costs in, which is why you see an increase in certified salaries. And then you have your increases moving forward. When we also look at classified, you offset some of your classified expenses as well last year. You are also offsetting some additional ones this year with ESSER funds. The district is also offsetting some of its sub costs. They're paying for permanent subs with ESSER money. So the use of ESSER funds from 21 and 22 is significantly helping the district's operating deficit. I think it actually last year enabled you to have an operating surplus by moving those funds. And I can show you what you moved last year. The district used about $2,165,000 ESSER funds to offset general fund, not all, but some general fund expenses. There's estimated use over the next 3 years, $1,445,000 ESSER funds are going to be used this year, followed by $1,392,000 and then $1,311,000. So by 2024, the district is projected to go through all of the ESSER funds and have any of the general fund related expenses come back in 2025. We have also included for health benefits, we have maintained one premium holiday in future projections. The district, I believe we had about a 7% increase budgeted. It came in at 3.9%, your premium increase for your health insurance. And moving forward, I'm sorry, we had a 5% increase in last year, and it came in at 3.9, and we do have a 5% increase moving forward as well. Some of the staff in 2025, we have their health insurance coming back in, and retirement and benefits as well. back from the ESSER funds. When we look at non-personnel expenses, purchase services is one of your biggest ones. As we mentioned before, you can see in purple, this is where you had your tuition expenses. So you're going to go from 2.8 million in tuition expenses down to about 1.2 million because of no community school scholarships or open enrollment. This is what's remaining is going to be court place, foster place, outside placements to specialty facilities, as well as excess costs are still in play. When we take those out, this is what's left in purchase services. Utilities are basically back slightly below where you were in your 2019 pre-COVID levels. That's here in red. When you look in green, communication, these are things for your connectivity. And then repair costs and property insurance fall under property services. And you're still significantly below where you were pre-COVID, but spending around $340,000 each year for property insurance and repairs to buildings and grounds. Then what you have left is your 410. 410 is going to be contracted services you get from other entities. And if I break that down a little bit more, you can see specifically what we are talking about. And I'll bring this up in a column chart for you. So you might ask, why are we having such an increase from 21 to 22 and then in 23 in contracted services? There's several reasons why. One is what you see here in this orange is your preschool. You had a significant decrease in preschool because of COVID, and we have it going back to pre-COVID levels. This is your special ed preschool, I believe, that you contract out for. You also were paying for some services with your wellness funds, purchase services, and we have those coming back in as well in 23, which is why you see an increase from 22 to 23 in this blue area. And then finally, we have decreases in legal fees moving forward. We have your 416 data processing staying about the same. And then your other contracted services are about staying the same. So really your biggest changes are from preschool. And then when your wellness funds dry up, bringing the services you were paying for with your wellness fund back in the general fund are the two things that are significantly impacting your increase from 21 to 22, and then just having inflationary growth moving forward. Any questions on that? The other large item is your supplies. Supplies, if we break it into four main areas, you have your general supplies down here. We have these just below your pre-COVID levels. These are things like classroom supplies, office supplies, things like that. You will notice in orange here a significant decrease, even though it says textbooks. This also includes your Chromebook purchases. So the ESSER fund, iPad purchases, I believe they are. The district will be utilizing ESSER funds for 2 years to offset the lease payments for that. And then we bring them back into the general fund in 24 through 26. Even though the lease is ending on that, the assumption is that those will need to be replaced. That's why those costs are maintained past 2023. Once again, the reason you see the increase of $80,000 is because the district is using ESSER funds for 22 and 23 to pay for those. We have your maintenance supplies. The district did offset 2020 and 2021 some maintenance supplies and custodial supplies. We bring those in about $145,000 a year, and then increase by 1 to 2% a year due to inflationary increases. Some of the places you're seeing the biggest increase in supply costs is in transportation. With the shutdown and COVID, you saw a decrease going from 2019 to 2020. We basically take it back to 22 levels. This is a place we're going to want to monitor with, number one, fuel costs going up, and then number two, the parts for buses increasing significantly. There is a chance that you may exceed your 2019 level in 22. We'll be monitoring that each month and seeing how those costs are coming in. Besides that, your purchase services and supplies outside of salaries, those two items are your two major areas of cost. There's a minimal amount of money dedicated here for equipment replacement. You have about $100,000 a year. Spent about 115 last year. We have about $100,000 a year set aside for different types of equipment to be purchased, especially technology-related equipment out of the general fund. And then other than that, you have some debt payments for a House Bill 264 loan that will be coming off in 2025. That loan will be paid off, so those expenses are taken out. And then the only other thing that you have left is what's called other objects. Other objects is mainly going to be your county auditor and treasurer fees. I'm not sure why it's not coming up yet. County auditor and treasurer fees, and then some of your ESC costs. So I'll bring those up here for you to see. So your county ESC and your county auditor and treasurer fees are your two most significant when we look at that. And we have those maintaining basically at their 21 level moving forward. You can see here is your county auditor and treasurer fees. And then down here is your ESC fees that did drop from 20 to 21, and we maintain them at the 21 level.
How much is that figure for the county auditor and the county ESC?
County auditor and treasurer fees about $182,000, and a lot of that's derived. It's a calculation based off your property values and property tax collections. And then your county ESC fees. This is what's deducted from your state foundation. So you may be purchasing some additional services from them, but this is what's deducted from your foundation is $208,000 last year. We're about $213,000 this year. So revisiting the initial dashboard we were looking at, kind of doing a summary where the district is. The district's going to projected to have an operating deficit of $480,000 this year, which would give you, if that comes to fruition, a cash balance of about almost $7.5 million at the end of 2022. As the district starts the deficits to spend more in 23 and 24, your cash balance continues to go down. And right now it is projected that the district will have a negative cash balance in 2025 of $1.2 million. Once again, this is an improvement from the previous forecast because of mainly the use of ESSER funds to offset current year expenses from 22 through 24. And then also the increases in property values and the gross collection rate we talked about helped 22, as well as moving forward, ongoing the increase in property values. So with that, I'll open up to any questions you may have.
On the wellness stuff, do you have the knowledge what additional expenses added? Funds, it wasn't being paid out of the operating fund?
Sure. For your wellness funds, I can show you in total. The district was, so at the end of last year, you had about a $492,000 cash balance. You spent about $491,000 last year. So your cash balance was almost, you had 1 year left. So we assume that you're going to spend that down this year, your remaining cash balance, before we bring those expenses back in the general fund. If you want to know what specific costs you're paying for with those, I can bring that up. And so you had about $221,000 last year in certified regular salaries. So teacher salaries were being paid, could be teaching or nursing, but it'd be your certified staff. Minimum amount, about $1,800 in probably sub cost. And then you had $127,000 that you were spending for professional 410 contracted services, $30,000 for nursing services, and it looks like you paid some tuition cost of $28,000 as well. And then you had about $83,000 in retirement and health insurance from the certified staff that you were paying. So of the $221,000, you also had additional $83,000. So basically, you had around just over 300,000 in staff cost and about 185,000 in purchase services. The majority of those costs will be expended out of the 467 fund in 22 because you have a cash balance, and then in 23 we bring those back, all but 20,000 back in the general fund, and then in 24 that remaining 20,000 comes in.
Are we able to look at what costs we already had that we put into the wellness and what additional positions were created simply because we had this extra money?
Ryan, if I can just, I can probably answer this one.
Sure.
Those were a movement from our general fund for our counselors and were picked up by our health and wellness. That was our officers from the sheriff's office, and we were able to move a nurse there.
Okay, so we had added those 3 positions?
No, those were already being taken from general fund. That was before me. But it is our counselors, our nurse, and our officers.
Okay, so I remember having conversations about adding positions.
Oh, that was before me, I'm sorry.
When we received that money. So I guess it'd be good to look at what positions were added and then just evaluate the need for those continuing on.
Did we add any positions?
I was not aware.
If you want to double check on that, I know we did reclassify money over there, but I believe we did add some positions because we have the money and could do it.
Do you know what year that was?
When did
Probably would have been 2020 is when the funds were first made available.
20.
So I can just look in
Yeah.
2019
Okay,
and see
thank
what
you.
we did
Yeah.
different.
We added half a nurse when COVID came in. That's all I'm aware of.
this would have been, I think, when the fund first came in.
I'll run some reports and see if I can identify.
All right, thank you.
What other questions, mate, you have I can answer?
I think I mean, I would like to ask about Nexus because that's something that keeps being, thought about, and the community thinks that it will be helpful to us. Has Nexus been helpful in our funding as far as how the state looks at us?
No, that's a negative on how the state looks at you. The reason is because it's making you look richer on a property value perspective when they're figuring out your state funding.
So we're getting 38% of what Nexus, what we thought we were going to get. And how does do you know what percentage the state looks at us as receiving?
The state's considering that as 100. I mean, they're looking at it as that's your total property value. So until and if they're reduced, the state won't reduce that in your calculation to determine your state funding until those funds it's officially reduced by the courts.
So when the money may be received for that, there will be no state funding. It would need to be repaid. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what was that?
If we would get the full 100% minus 38% we've already received, we would not have to repay any state funding because of that.
No, because the calculation's assuming that at 100% value right now, they haven't reduced it.
And then Patty, could you just clarify? I think you had said that the state had put some things into play to help us with this. Could you go over that? Is that part of what the guarantee is, or you had said that they put some things in place so that we wouldn't be penalized?
It had gone through the committee. The possibility it did not make it in any kind of legislative act. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. There was talk about the reduced rate, and then it just didn't make it through legislation, correct?
Yeah, I did not make it into the final bill. The one part since you said Nexus, I did forget to mention in the presentation is we do have the funds still being transferred out just so you know what those amounts are, let me bring those up. We don't break them down here, do we? So here's the amounts here being transferred out. 1.6 million projected for this year, and then it goes down as there's estimated deflation in the value of the property.
So if we would keep Nexus money in our operating funds, would that help lower a possible amount we need for a levy?
If you didn't transfer these funds, then you would, in essence, you would reduce your operating deficit. And so while it wouldn't, out here in 26, while it wouldn't solve your issues, that instead of this being a $4.7 million operating deficit, instead it would be 3.3 or 3.2. It would have an effect on your cash balance as well. If you were to stop, depending on when you stop to do those, then yes, it would reduce the negative cash balance or eliminate the negative cash balance in 25. You would probably still have one in 26, depending on when you would do that, if you would do something like that. So I guess the answer to your question is that it would reduce your financial, if you were to consider either making cuts or going for new levies, that would reduce that impact.
And just in general, I know in the spring when you attended our meetings, you stated that we couldn't cut our way out of the situation that we're in. Is that still your opinion?
I think from my understanding, the administration went through areas that they could reduce expenses without impacting programs, and there's about $235,000 in funding reduction and spending reductions this year as part of that visiting. I think when I looked at it with Patty, Patty was the number we came up with. It was about, you'd have to reduce about 40 some positions.
Yes.
To eliminate in just the near future your operating deficits. So I've seen districts make significant reductions that impacted programs, and I'm guessing in your size district with talking that many positions, that would be a substantial impact to your programs.
So if a levy is not pursued or a levy does not pass, how soon would you estimate that those reductions would have to be made?
The longer you wait, the more reductions you have to make, the harder it is to overcome. So, your goal is my goal when I was a treasurer was always to have an operating surplus for 2 years out. So you're going to want to start looking, if you believe there's additional cuts, it's something you want to start looking at for the next school year. Obviously already being in the current school year, it's not a lot of change you can make in the current, but it'd be something you'd want for the next school year to address the 1.9 million. You do bring up a good point with your renewal levy. This is assuming that renewal levy passes. That renewal levy needs to be renewed prior to 2024. You can see here that it's half of the renewal levy is shown under renewal levies here at 748,000, and then the full amount of 1.4 million. And I think you have 2 levies, right, that need renewed, not just one.
Should be just one.
Just one, or they might be combined. We have them separated in here, but you can see the impact of those renewal levies. So strategically, if the district was considering a levy, you might also want to consider about when you have to go on the ballot for those as well.
And is your recommendation, or would your recommendation still be about 7 mils or 11?
It really depends on when the district would consider going. The longer you wait, the more higher of a levy you need. And I'll download this. This report kind of gives you an idea of where you need to be. I'll bring that up, and I need to stop sharing my screen and reshare. So when we look at this scenario here, depending on what year you go, this is what you're looking at. So if you were to go and levy, tax year 22, you're looking between a 5.4 and a 7. If you were to wait till 2024, you're looking at between an 8.44 and a 9.32.
You're assuming that the numbers come out accurate. I mean, we're looking at the original forecast for 2022, knowing that we were getting the ESSER money. We had projected a decrease of 2.6 in the deficit spending, and it's 480. So you're assuming that all these numbers are accurate going all the way out to 2025, but it seems like the further you get out, the less accurate they are.
Yeah, anytime you do projections, you're looking the farther out you get, the more of a projection it is. If you'd been sitting in the treasurer's chair, let's say 4 years ago, and said, we're going to reduce expenses and increase revenue because there's going to be a pandemic, people would probably thought you were crazy and that schools are going to be shut down. That changed things. If you would have said, hey, the housing market's going to be on fire and you're going to have double the increases in property values that you did a year ago, if you were sitting there 3 years ago, there have been no data to support that. When you're forecasting, you're doing everything with data. When we did the forecast in May, we made the statement then the district had ESSER 3 money. I think we had that conversation, and it wasn't in the forecast because they had not determined how, and there wasn't a lot of guidelines on how they're going to spend it. And that's why that money was brought in. There was also no indication that the district was going to have their highest collection rate, 103% this year in comparison to the previous years, which was below 90, it was around 99%. So that brought in some additional revenue too. When you look at your expenses though, so on a revenue standpoint, we know that unless there's another significant change in the law, there's no additional state funding coming to the district. And that now includes your open enrollment revenue. So what you're left with is your property taxes. And we know that your property taxes only are going to have significant changes once every 3 years. And you just had that this year. So the assumption that there's going to be another significant change in property taxes, unless the pipeline lawsuit would go the district's way and the district would decide to use those funds that went your way for the operating needs of the district, there's not a whole lot on the revenue side that's going to change the trajectory that you're on. Now, when we look at expenses, we can definitely take a look at what is impacting the district's expenses. And where might someone say, well, this, and this is the question when I work with treasurers, I say, how would you answer this question? If you were sitting here, where would you possibly make other assumptions than what the district has? And so the salary and benefit portion is rather simple. There are a couple of anomalies in there that we could talk about, but all we have in here is base wage increases and step increases moving forward. There's no reductions in staffing. There's no increases in staffing. So when we look at these numbers here, with the exception of staff coming back in from the wellness fund or bringing staff back in from ESSER, if the district's plans are to continue as is, there's not going to be a lot of changes to your staffing unless you have a large number of retirements and replace them with staff much lower in the salary schedule, or you have a large number of retirements or RIF and you don't replace those staff members. When we look at benefits, your benefits, there has been some fluctuations there in years past. We are assuming one premium holiday moving forward. The district's had as many as 3 premium holidays in a year. That's out of the district's control. That's in the Stark County COGS control. And then also what the premium increases are, we're projecting a 5% increase each year, I believe. Let me double check that though for you. And the industry standard is about an 8% increase per year. So we are below that. We could do an assumption that the staff is not going to have any raises for the next 5 years. And we can make an assumption that there's no health insurance increases. We do have a 7% in here. Even with dropping your health insurance increases down to 0, which history and current, the business environment for health insurance tells you it's probably not going to be a 0. and also dropping your raises down. And that's a board decision and administrative decision. If you want to, no base wage increases for staff would still have you having spending overspending. So then outside of staffing, without reducing staffing positions, there's really only two areas to look at. And these are areas that the district can consider when looking at making reductions or how you'd want to project this moving forward if you believe that it's going to be on a different trajectory than what we have. And to show you that, if we look at your purchase services and we break that down, your tuition costs have already been reduced. And what's left here is basically a lot of your special education tuition and court place and foster care. The district does not have a lot of control over these numbers here. When we get into things like utilities, the only way usually you're going to cut utility costs is by eliminating facilities. Without that, there's no way to usually significantly reduce what you have here in red as your utility cost. Repair costs, the district could easily say, if you have an alternative source like a PI fund, that any repair costs are not going to come out of the general fund. And that would be one way you could reduce these costs, or you're only going to pay so much, and anything over that dollar amount is going to come from another funding source. That's another option the district has. When you get into your contracted services down here, we're talking about things like your OT and PT services, some of your health services that we talked about. I believe your SROs are going to be coming into here in 23, like we talked about the wellness fund, and then your public preschool. Now, those are decisions if there's things in there that the board said those are not things that we're going to continue, you can also reduce those. But these are the areas outside of salary and benefits that you're left with as far as purchase services go: tuition, utilities, repairs, and contracted services. The only other place that you have of significance outside of your transfers out in the general fund is going to be your supplies. Your busing is going to be fuel and repair and parts. If you wanted to change your transportation, you did have, if you look, you had savings of $120,000 over 2 years in transportation because you weren't driving as many buses and bus fuel was down. Now the cost of bus fuel is up. If that would go down in future years, could you save some money there? Absolutely. Is it going to be a significant source of savings? Probably not. If you change your busing, is that going to be a significant source? It's probably not going to be a significant source in relation to your operating deficit, but it may help chip away if that's something the board wanted to do. When you look down here at your textbooks, these are really, if you were not going to renew or replace your current technology, that is something where you might possibly be able to pick up some cost savings moving forward. And then you have your classroom supplies and your office supplies. If you're going to cap those, the question is significantly eliminating any of these going to alter the financial projection you're on without significantly slashing these? Probably not. It could help by doing changes to a lot of these, but you're probably talking about big changes to areas of things like transportation or classroom management with supplies and technology. So there's really 4 areas or 3 areas: salary and benefits, and that's all basically based on positions, because right now we just have your step increases and estimated base wage increases in there. And then bringing the funds back from ESSER that helped offset these. And then you have purchase services like we talked about, and supplies outside of the transfer out of the general fund. Those are the main areas of the district. What I'd encourage anyone to do is look at this information. Patty can provide it to you. And if you think that there's some unreasonable trends in here, we can all definitely change them. When I went through this with Patty and her assistant on multiple occasions, we went through this exact same exercise saying, where in this budget is there something that is unrealistic to see this trend continuing forward? And we were not able to identify any. That doesn't mean that somebody else might say, I don't want transportation to be at $308,000 by 2026 for supplies there. Or we think that you can do something different with general supplies.
Could you clarify what the cost of the premium holiday is on insurance?
Sure. So it's essentially what you pay for 1 month of health insurance, and that is going to change every year. But if we look at our projections, you're going to save approximately $733,000 this year because you had 2 premium holidays. It was about $720,000 last year. We have $365,000 or 1 premium holiday in next year. That then grows to $390,000 because of your 7% increase in your premium. So it basically grows by 7% per year. $733,000 is a savings by having 2 premium holidays this year, $365,000 next year because we're assuming you're only going to have 1.
And what has been the history? How many have we had?
Historically, you've had fluctuations from between, I think one year you had 4, 2, you've had 3, you've had 1. There's been fluctuations across. And this is all controlled by the COG. And Patty, correct me if I'm wrong, the COG recommends not including any premium holidays in the forecast, but we did not think that was realistic based off the history, so we put at least 1 in each year. I do not know what process they go through to determine how many they're going to have a year, and what that could be moving forward.
So for the current year, you have 2.
2.
And that's all we'll have for this year. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's set.
Mhm.
Could you go through the ESSER 3 funds, how, what was used to reduce current operating expenses and what's used for additional expenses that weren't already budgeted?
So I don't track additional expenses. I know Patty does because it doesn't affect the forecast. Actually, I think we do have those in here, though. Let me see how I have those modeled. We might actually put those in. And Patty, I will need to rely on you to know which ones are new versus what you're spending the new funds on.
We spent about $100,000 on summer school. We hired an additional tutor for any learning losses. There are 2 positions that were not filled for tutors because they're just not out there. We moved a Title II teacher over to ESSER this year because we were cut. I believe it's about $60,000 in federal grants in that specific grant. So instead of putting her or that person back onto general fund, we moved them to ESSER. So those were not additional savings. Moving from one grant to another is not considered additional savings for the general fund. However, we had to fund her somehow.
And I think of the $320,000 you have budgeted for supplies for the next 3 years, $80,000 is offsetting general fund expenses, and the remaining is other equipment that the district decided need to replace. Correct me if I'm wrong, Patty.
That's correct. I think Dr. Mike had spoken to the curriculum. We need to get some curriculum in place. We also are moving some of our remote learning or online seats and site licenses to that as an allowable expense, but those will all come back on afterwards. An additional, we are using ESSER funds to refresh our iPads. We are also going to use it for purchase of some infrastructure, such as our servers. This will help to accommodate that internet speed and really traffic. Were those in the general fund? No, they weren't. We really need to sit down and look at PI because we did not have a plan before this to replace our infrastructure for servers, so that you would not see that specific savings because it was not in, but it needs to be addressed.
how much of this is part of the lost learning that we need to allocate to the lost learning versus what we have more of a free reign to?
I believe that was 800 and some thousand we had to. Don't quote me on that. I will have to get that
But
figure
is
for you.
that, is that the curriculum you're putting in that? I guess what are you putting in the 800,000-ish category? Is that the curriculum, the servers?
I would have to specifically look at the plan that is online, but I know a lot of that is planned some summer school services. The additional tutor would be classified as learning loss. And some of the curriculum where it speaks to those specific groups like our economically disadvantaged, our EL, our special ed, our gifted, those pieces of parts we currently need to really beef up and get a better base for. That would be, how do we address learning losses? It's not gonna, there's not enough in learning losses for all that. You can pick and choose, it's all gonna come out of ESSER.
And refreshing the iPads, is there no way to get like another year out of that? How's that work? How do you decide?
Usually to refresh iPads, you do a couple classes a year. And the reason you do that is because if you buy 5 buses this year, then 5 buses are probably going to be needing replaced at the end of their life. So we try and replace 2 classes each year so that we don't get in a situation where if we can't that year, maybe we can stretch it out another year. But if we have, 5 classes that we refresh that year, chances are it would not be as good of a chance that we could get moving forward, if that makes sense. Just like the buses, if you buy 1 a year or 2 a year, whatever you're on track for, then you're probably going to continue to have to buy 1 or 2 each year instead of that 5 all at once.
So if you put the refresh on hold, then it could all bunch up, basically.
You're just
Correct.
pushing it down the road.
Pushing it down the road to
Just
get all
pushing it
bunched
down
up
the road.
together.
How many years are we getting out?
I believe Ben said 5 or 6. I will have to check on that with him.
And we're going to stay with iPads, we're going to get different devices, or what's the thought process on?
That would have to be a
I don't know yet.
administrative team decision. That would mean a whole new learning for teachers. Not saying it can't, but if we make that switch, do we do it all at once? Do we do it year by year? Put in kindergartners are going to Dells or Chromebooks, or you would almost have to do that in a way that didn't affect your kids that are already working on one.
Is that
Negatively.
something that we consider, or we're not looking at
Oh, we
that?
can look at it. We could look.
Back to your question on the Nexus, because I think I spoke to you after recently, and you had said that there was some subsidy by the state that they were trying to equalize that, but if that didn't happen, it didn't happen. But my question is, what are we doing with our representatives and our lobbyists to get equalization? We're not the only district that's not getting 100% of the pipeline money. I think all the districts that are getting pipeline money are only getting reduced amount. What work is being done so that districts such as ours are not penalized for not receiving 100%?
We are part of a coalition moving forward, the Pipeline Coalition. I don't, Mike, I think you know how many districts was negatively affected by this. It was a very small.
6 was that since our county now, or I don't know. I'd have to look at that. I don't know.
So I know
It's a
Dr.
small
Mike reaches
number.
out to our legislative.
Yeah, most of them don't call back or respond.
And
One ask.
I know we have some advocates at Forecast 5. You know, I just went to a training with Forecast 5 and they spoke about that, you know.
And what was?
About, you know, looking and really being an advocate for us. I don't remember this.
Who is our advocate for that subject?
For the coalition, I know Becky. I know the coalition, the Pipeline Coalition, does that a lot. I know that, you know, Alan Harold is a real advocate for us.
Yes.
And, you know, Ryan Ryan has a couple people in that company that go to state meetings and you know, advocate for us. I don't know their specific names. I think one's Mike. Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, we do more for informational purposes when your organizations ask. You know, a lot of times your Ohio School Board Association or the Ohio Association of School Business Officials will help with those. And if they ask for expert testimony or for us to provide data, we provide that data to them.
So that pipeline money that's coming out is pretty well earmarked for paying back the repairs to Washington and Lexington, which, including this year, the amount coming in should be 3.5 to 4 years payback. And then what will the Nexus money be at that point if it stays at 38%?
Is that for me? For Mike? Or?
I don't know.
I think she's saying what's it earmarked for.
Oh, what's it earmarked for? Oh, I don't know. We'll have to.
No, what's the dollar amount at that point?
The dollar amount, if you look on, it's the transfer out. Oh. The let me look at
Could
that.
be like 3 years.
It is on. Oh, here it is. 5.010. That's your Nexus coming into your general fund, and then we're transferring it out to 070 as a capital projects. So 3 years out, 4 years out, 25. It's 1.5 million. Goes to 1.4.
Well, you're still going to have some repair needs at that point in time for things in high school, that sort of thing. But I think we need to keep in mind that if we continue paying off the Lexington and Washington project at the rate we are, which is Frank paid off 3.5 to 4 years, that is going to free up funds going forward. And potentially we'll know at that point where the lawsuit's going to settle. Hearing on that is February, is that correct?
It's set right now, February.
So what you're saying is if we pay it off in 25.
If it's paid off in 25, depending on what other projects we do in the high school spring fund, if that was something we need to address. But the Nexus pipeline is going to continue. It will decrease over time, but it is going to continue. And that's going to be funds available once you fix some project and get this paid for. It's going to have money into the future.
We hope. They can go bankrupt any day they want. And in the U.S., you can just go bankrupt and move on and start again the next day under a different name. So I don't think there's anything guaranteed. And I just heard recently, I haven't had time to research, there have been other states where the courts were very, very favorable to the pipeline and the people lost big money. So I just heard that. I don't know where that's coming from. I think Pennsylvania was one of them.
Well, they haven't contested more than 38. You know, 38% is what we're receiving, and they haven't contested that. So
yeah, I mean, who knows
so
though?
that hasn't been contested.
Yeah.
And what for vernacular money would continue. It's the 62% test. And anybody can go bankrupt and state funding is unpredictable from year to year, but just comparing from last year, from May till now, you know, the outlook is much different.
And, I mean, I just have to say this: if we 25, you know, we're coming into that year, and you know, we're just below 30 days. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, we're talking about cash flow difficulties possibly. If we go into that thinking
I think all the pieces and parts, and you know, make the best decision that we can. I know you presented that you would be able to cut about $400,000 from the budget, but I don't think that we've reached that figure yet.
We did not.
100,000 for the budget. I'm
No,
sorry, I
400, I think, is
400.
what
Oh.
we were talking about
No,
last year. that
I
we'd
thought
be
it
able
was
to cut.
closer to 300, but I guess it was less than that. When it all shook out, you know, we had, what, 50 staff changes? We had a lot of people leave, and to get a body, we had to give years. I mean, that all factored in. We're a very, very low paid school district, so to get people come here, we had to give them their years, which that's unheard of. And we're not the only district that did that. I mean, other districts have had to do that. It's a cost, so.
Any other questions for Ryan? I don't want to keep him too
Yeah.
long. I know he's on overtime, right,
Yeah,
Ryan?
he's
You do get overtime, right?
I wish.
like you did when you were treasurer, huh?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Anything?
are we able to get copies of the various pages
Yeah.
of the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Is that something we can,
Yes.
that he'd be able to provide?
Yes.
I think. Thank you.
Ryan, anything else?
Nope, that's all. Let me know if there's anything else you guys need from me for the board meeting, and if not, I'll probably do the same presentation.
Well, I just want to thank you for your presentation tonight. Thank you for your support and your insight into our trends and areas, specific areas. It's just invaluable. I just appreciate you. So,
No problem.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, you guys have a good night. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you very
Okay.